possibility of dangerous long-range side effects from the widespread use of DDT and other pesticides. Have you considered asking the Department of Agriculture to take a closer look at this?
Yes, and I know that they already are. I think particularly, of course, since Ms. Carson's book, but they are examining the matter.
An alarming discovery on an island of pelicans off the California coast suggested that the effects of man-made poisons were much as Rachel Carson had described. Though the island was uninhabited by people and no pesticide had ever been sprayed there, the birds had ceased breeding. An expedition went to discover what was wrong. One of the scientists was Lloyd Kiff. Knowing DDT could cause birds to lay eggs with thin shells, he suspected that traces of pesticides washed out to sea from coastal rivers might be to blame.
This was an extremely formative experience in my life and in the lives of everyone who went out there during this period. It's a difficult landing on that part of the island where the pelican colony is located. We climbed very steep cliffs. It was an absolutely perfect scene. Beautiful setting, go up to these bird nests here of these wild birds, 500 pairs of pelicans arising from this colony. The nest all adorned with flowers, everything perfect. But all the eggs were broken. And in that whole season, where there were over 1,200 nesting attempts by pelicans, and they produced only 2 young. All their eggs broke from the weight of the incubating females. And this was a horrifying scene to us. I can't describe how moved we were by this, that something so insidious could be changing the world like this.
Like the mercury at Minamata, DDT had found its way into the fish. It had entered the food chain and was poisoning the pelicans. By now it was clear that few of these new problems were just local. Concern for the whole Earth came into sharp focus late in 1968 when humans were first able to see their planet from 250,000 miles away.
We saw the Earthrise as we crossed behind the moon, and the Earth came back into view, where we had visited a very alien and very hostile and lifeless moon. And we saw the Earth as the only home that we know of within our near space capable of supporting life. And we recognized the absolute necessity to protect and nurture and take care of this environment.
All right.
I believe that much of the Earth movements and the Earth-related movements came about as a result of that picture and some of the ones that we developed for Gemini, where we took a look back at Earth from way out and saw this very fragile environment that we live in, and it's the only source of life that we know of.
And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good Earth.
The pictures from space were seen by hundreds of millions. Among them was a student and future environmental lawyer, Dick Ayers.
I think all of us came of age during the period of the first space missions. And so we were the first kids to see pictures of our planet taken by another human being. And I think that affected everyone. It made us feel how small the planet was. And then we began to read things like the Cuyahoga River in Ohio had caught fire. And we realized that we weren't taking very good care of this planet.
The planet was being subjected to other indignities as well. Demand for crude oil continued to rise to meet the needs of consumer societies. And as the oil tankers themselves became ever larger, accidents of unprecedented magnitude were waiting to happen.
At last, the Torrey Canyon lay in her death throes, her back broken, her fight against fate lost irretrievably. Less than 2 weeks ago, a fine ship of...
When the Torrey Canyon hit rocks off the west of England, it was fully loaded with 120,000 tons of oil, and no one knew what to do. In desperation, British Prime Minister Harold Wilson called in warplanes to try to set the oil on fire.
As we crossed the Scottish border, looking up ahead of us, we could see a large black cloud going up to at least 30,000 feet. And as we got closer, we actually realized that this cloud was the smoke from the burning Torrey Canyon. We were circling the tanker at about 5,000 feet and then would go down into a dive for a dive bombing attack. As soon as you had released the bombs, you pulled away very steeply, and I can clearly see in my mind today the sight of my bombs hitting the tanker, the side of the tanker opening out and the deck peeling back, and then a huge gout of smoke and very red flame leaping out probably 1,000 feet into the air.
The bombing was spectacular, but futile. Most of the Torrey Canyon's oil had already escaped. When the thick oil slopped ashore, the authorities were ill-prepared. Television showed scenes that would become all too familiar in the years ahead. Seabirds were immediate victims, and people like Olga Penrose tried desperately to rescue them.
During the Torrey Canyon episode, there were birds brought in where, when you looked in the box, it was a ball of tar and a beak sticking through, and you literally had to scrape this ball of tar until you got to the actual bird, and that was really horrific. It was very sad, and you know that the oil is burning the bird, so you try to get it off as quickly as possible. It did make you feel so inadequate and very angry, you know, to think that man had done this and we couldn't do anything to save them.
A general sense of anger and frustration grew fastest in the United States, and it was there that people first took to the streets. In the spring of 1970, millions took part in a mass demonstration across the country. In New York, pedestrians reclaimed Fifth Avenue.
Earth Day was the most massive outpouring of human beings that had ever surrounded any issue up to that time. We had 20 million Americans drawn from all walks of life, turning out in these huge events in every major city and most little minor hamlets across the country to protest the direction that the world seemed to be headed.
The President of the United States.
The grassroots movement persuaded President Nixon to begin taking steps to clean up America.
It is time for all of us to concern ourselves with the way real people live in real life. The great question of the 70s is, shall we surrender to our surroundings, or shall we make our peace with nature and begin to make reparations for the damage we have done to our air, to our land, and to our water?
Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency and promoted a Clean Air Act to curb atmospheric pollution. In the future, cars would have to pass stringent tests, and all manufacturers would have to consider the environmental impact of their products. The mass media carried a new sort of advertising message.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it.